There is a specific kind of quiet that exists in Nordic countries that is not simply the absence of noise. It is not the quiet of an empty room, or a muted television, or a moment between songs. It is something with more texture than those things. A quality of silence that has been inhabited so long it has become a feature of the culture, rather than simply a feature of the geography. This video is an attempt to describe what that quiet actually feels like from the inside, which is the only direction from which it can be meaningfully described at all. Before we continue, if you'd consider subscribing, it only takes a few seconds and helps the channel out a lot. Now, let's get into it. Start with the forest, because the forest is where the Nordic quiet is most complete and most itself. A Norwegian forest in November is not silent in the technical sense. There is wind in the branches if there is wind, and there are birds if there are birds, and there is the sound of your own footsteps on whatever the path is made of at that time of year. But underneath all of those sounds, and present even when they are absent, is something that does not have a good word in English. It is the quality of a space that has not been recently interrupted by human noise, that has not had music played into it, or conversation directed through it, or machinery run across it. A space that is simply itself, doing what it does, at the pace it moves at, with no awareness that it is being experienced by anyone. Walking into a Nordic forest in November is walking into a kind of quiet that most people who live in cities or suburbs have never encountered as an adult, and the specific response the body has to it, a slowing, a deepening of breath, an unclenching of something that had been held without knowing it was held, is not a chosen response. It is simply what happens when the nervous system encounters the absence of everything it has been managing. The quiet of the Nordic interior is a different thing from the forest quiet, but related to it. A Nordic living room in the evening, with one lamp on and the darkness outside pressing against the window, produces a specific quality of inhabited silence that is distinct from the silence of a room where everyone has simply stopped talking. People who have spent time in Nordic homes describe the silences differently from silences in their own cultures. In many cultures, silence between people is a gap to be filled, evidence of awkwardness or disconnection that someone must take responsibility for resolving. In Nordic social life, silence between people who are comfortable with each other is not a gap. It is a form of company. Two people sitting quietly in the same room, each in their own thoughts, neither feeling the obligation to perform conversation into the space between them, are not failing to connect. They are connected enough that the silence requires no management. This specific relationship with shared silence is one of the things that visitors to Nordic countries notice earliest and find hardest to replicate when they return home. It is not that Nordic people are less social or less warm. It is that the warmth they offer does not depend on constant verbal output to maintain itself. The friendship that can sit quietly is a friendship that has reached a different level of ease than one that cannot, and Nordic culture normalizes that level of ease earlier and in more relationships than most other cultures do. The quiet between people is not something that needs to be earned through a long history together. It is available relatively early, because the cultural expectation that silence must always be filled is simply not as strong. The winter is where all of this becomes most concentrated and most visible. A Nordic winter is dark in a way that produces its own specific quality of quiet, because the darkness changes what is possible outdoors, and therefore changes what happens indoors, which becomes warmer and more deliberate and more inward-facing in a way that summer does not produce. The specific interior culture of the Nordic winter, with its candles and its lamps and its long evenings that cannot be spent outside, and so are spent inside with full intention, is built around the quiet that the darkness provides, rather than against it. There is no fighting the Nordic winter dark. There is only inhabiting it, and the culture that has been inhabiting it for generations has developed specific practices for doing so, that produce, in their aggregate, an interior life with a quality of quietness that is actually unusual. There is something specific that happens to sound in a Nordic winter that is worth naming, because it is one of the clearest physical expressions of the quiet. Snow absorbs sound. A landscape covered in snow is a landscape where the ambient noise level drops in a way that is immediately perceptible, where footsteps are muffled and voices carried differently, and the general background hum of a world in motion is reduced to something closer to its actual minimum. A Nordic city after heavy snowfall at night produces a silence that most urban environments never approach. a quiet so complete that it registers as almost architectural, as though the snow has installed a room around every sound and absorbed it before it can travel. People who grow up in Nordic countries and then live elsewhere for years describe the first heavy snowfall after returning as one of the most immediately recognizable sensory homecomings available, not because of how the snow looks, but because of what it does to the sound of the world. What does it do to a person growing up inside this much quiet? This is the question that is hardest to answer, because the effect is cumulative and largely invisible from inside it. A Nordic person who has spent their childhood and adolescence in environments where silence was normal and not anxious, where the forest was available and regularly visited, where winter evenings were long and interior and actually quiet, has a different relationship with their own inner life than someone who grew up in an environment where every gap was filled and every silence was uncomfortable. The quiet, experienced consistently over years, produces a familiarity with one's own thoughts that is not available in environments where those thoughts are constantly interrupted before they complete themselves. It produces, in the most literal sense, a person who knows what their own mind does when left alone with itself. That is not a small thing. It may be one of the most important things. All the sources and data referenced in this video are listed in the description below. Sit with that for a moment. I'll see you in the next one.